You don't belong here. The words cut through the air like a blade, leaving a chill that settled over the entire restaurant. Michael Thompson, CEO of GreenTech Enterprises, stood at the entrance of the exclusive Michelin-starred dining room, dressed simply in a black hoodie and jeans. He had come to this upscale spot to unwind, to enjoy an evening out. What he didn't expect was to be treated as if he didn't belong. The host, a young woman no older than 25, glanced at him with clear judgment. She didn't even bother to check his reservation. Her eyes quickly scanned his attire, and in that moment she decided he wasn't worthy of a table in this exclusive restaurant. The staff behind her seemed to silently agree, their eyes following Michael as he stood there, trying to make sense of what just happened. Michael's presence in the room was invisible to them. They saw him as just another regular guy, not the billionaire tech mogul he was. As he stood there in silence, the sound of clinking glasses and soft murmurs of the other guests filled the space. But for Michael, the moment had frozen. He was no stranger to prejudice. He had faced it throughout his career. Back when he was just another ambitious entrepreneur with a dream, he had worked through rejection, dismissed ideas, and overlooked opportunities, all because of the color of his skin. But this was different. This wasn't just another rejection. This was a direct insult. The hostess had called him out in front of everyone, and it was clear she was testing him, daring him to stand his ground. "You must be mistaken," he said, his voice calm, steady, and unerringly composed. "I have a reservation." The hostess eyed him, then glanced down at the list, clearly hoping to find a reason to reject him. "I'm sorry, but it appears your reservation is not here," she replied, her tone sharp with a hint of superiority. Michael didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and quietly dialed his assistant, Carla. Without saying a word, he handed the phone to the hostess. "Call this number and ask for confirmation," he said, his voice cool but unmistakably firm. The hostess hesitated for a moment before taking the phone. She murmured into it, trying to confirm his identity, and in that moment, Michael noticed a slight shift in her demeanor. The polite smile that once adorned her face was now replaced by a tense frown. Carla's voice came through the phone, sharp and clear. "Yes, Michael Thompson has a reservation, and we've already confirmed it. Please treat him with the respect he deserves." The hostess's eyes widened slightly as the reality of the situation hit her. Michael wasn't some random customer. He wasn't just a tech enthusiast in sneakers and a hoodie. He was the owner of the very technology company that had revolutionized industries worldwide. But before she could respond, Michael took a slow step back and turned his attention to the maitre d'. He was the one who needed to fix this situation. The maitre d' wasn't much older, but his face went pale the moment he saw Michael's calm, unwavering gaze. It was then that Michael made his next move, without raising his voice, without making a scene. He looked the maitre d' squarely in the eyes and said, "I'm not here for your apologies. I'm here for something much bigger. I'm here to take control of this situation." The maitre d' froze for a moment, clearly taken aback. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Michael calmly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Without saying another word, he opened an app and started typing. The screen flickered for a moment before he spoke again. "I'm not going to make a scene here," he said, his voice now carrying a weight that was impossible to ignore. "But if you don't fix this now, I'll make sure this restaurant never operates again." The maitre d' swallowed hard, clearly trying to process what was happening. Michael's words weren't just a threat, they were a promise. In that moment, the power dynamics in the room shifted. Michael wasn't just a guest anymore. He was the one with the leverage, the one who controlled the narrative. He had nothing to prove. The staff's attempt to humiliate him had only served to expose their own arrogance. Michael's words hung in the air for a brief second before Carla's voice broke the silence once more. "Protocol has been activated. The restaurant's ownership records are being updated. You no longer have the authority here." The maitre d' turned to the hostess, his face drained of color, as the realization set in. Michael wasn't leaving. Not until he had what he came for, justice and a little bit of revenge. As the minutes passed, Michael stood silently, watching as the restaurant around him shifted from high-class confidence to complete chaos. The managers scrambled, the staff began to panic. But Michael was unbothered. He had already won. The staff's mistake had turned into his victory. And as the maitre d' finally turned to him with a look of dread, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The power that once resided with the restaurant staff had been shattered, and now it was his to command. As Michael stood there, the tension in the air thickened. The maitre d' hesitated, his eyes flicking between Michael and the staff, unsure of what to do next. His once confident posture began to falter, and the restaurant, once filled with the quiet hum of well-dressed diners and polished silverware, now felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Michael wasn't in a rush. He had all the time in the world. He wasn't going anywhere. He watched as the maitre d' walked to the back office, likely to consult with the higher-ups, though Michael knew the real power here had already shifted. As he stood still, the whispers around him started to grow louder. People had begun to notice. A couple at a nearby table exchanged glances, their eyes widening in recognition. "That's Michael Thompson, the CEO of GreenTech." One of them whispered, though Michael could hear it perfectly. The hush spread across the room. A few heads turned toward him, as if waiting for something to happen. Michael stood unmoving, letting the whispers ripple through the room. It was exactly the reaction he wanted. A few moments later, the maitre d' returned with a slightly frazzled expression, followed by the general manager, a tall, middle-aged man with a well-groomed mustache. "Mr. Thompson," the general manager said, trying to sound calm but clearly flustered, "we sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. It appears there was an issue with our reservation system." Michael didn't respond immediately. He simply tilted his head, his eyes sharp, giving the general manager time to feel the weight of the silence. "I'm afraid this is more than just a mistake," Michael said, his voice smooth but carrying a clear authority. "I was disrespected in front of my peers, and I won't tolerate it. You have two options. Fix this immediately, or I'll make sure this place never operates again." The general manager, realizing the gravity of the situation, nodded nervously, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Of course, Mr. Thompson, we'll get this sorted right away. I'll personally ensure you're accommodated in the best possible way." But Michael wasn't done. He stood up, slowly walking toward the back of the room where the management office was located. The maitre d' and general manager exchanged worried glances, but neither dared to stop him. As Michael reached the office door, he glanced back at the room, noting the growing number of eyes now focused entirely on him. He could feel the power shift entirely into his hands. There was no need to raise his voice. There was no need to shout. Everything had already been said with his mere presence. Inside the office, the restaurant owner, a middle-aged man with graying hair, sat behind a large desk, looking just as startled as the staff. "Mr. Thompson, I wasn't aware of the situation. I'm deeply sorry for what happened. Please allow me to make it right." Michael smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was a smile that carried weight, the weight of years of hard work, success, and the unshakable confidence that came with it. "You don't need to make it right," Michael said calmly. "It's already too late for that. But I can give you a chance to save your business." The owner blinked, unsure of where this was going. Michael took a seat, not waiting for an invitation. "I've had a successful career," Michael continued, "and I've worked hard to get where I am. But it's moments like this that remind me of the work that still needs to be done. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to ensure that this never happens again, to me or to anyone else who walks through these doors." The room fell silent. Michael's words hung in the air, and the owner, now visibly sweating, understood the gravity of the situation. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want this restaurant," Michael replied. The owner blinked, then shook his head, unsure if he had heard correctly. "What?" "I want to buy this restaurant. Right now," Michael said, standing up and walking toward the owner's desk. "I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. I'll own this place, and I'll run it the way it should have been run from the start, with integrity and respect for everyone who walks through those doors." The owner stammered, unsure how to respond. Michael smiled again, this time with finality. "I'll give you a few minutes to decide. But make no mistake, I'm not leaving until you agree." Outside, the staff and diners continued to murmur, unsure of what was happening. but they were all witnessing the transformation of power. Michael wasn't just a CEO being humiliated. He was a CEO taking control. And the restaurant, once a symbol of exclusivity, was now a pawn in a game Michael had already won. The owner stared at Michael for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like an unyielding storm. He had thought the evening would be another successful night in the restaurant, but now it was all unraveling in front of him. Michael's presence filled the room, radiating a quiet power that no amount of wealth or status could ever compete with. "You have two choices," Michael said, his voice unwavering. "You can either agree to sell, or I can make sure this place is shut down permanently. I'm giving you the chance to walk away with something, but you're running out of time." The room fell silent. The restaurant owner looked at his staff, who had now gathered behind him, their faces tense and uncertain. He could feel the eyes of the diners through the thin walls, their curiosity growing with each passing second. The maitre d', who had once looked at Michael with disdain, now stood with his shoulders slumped, his confidence shattered. A few staff members had already begun to quietly file out of the room, clearly aware of what was unfolding. The owner cleared his throat, attempting to regain some sense of control, though it was obvious to everyone in the room that the control had already slipped from his hands. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this isn't how things work," he stammered, his voice cracking with the weight of his fear. Michael simply smiled, though it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was the kind of smile someone wears when they know they've already won, when they know the other person is simply playing catch-up. "It's not about how things work," Michael said calmly. "It's about how things will work from now on." The owner blinked, confusion written across his face. "What does that mean?" "It means that I'm going to change the way this restaurant operates. You were too blind to see the opportunity in front of you, too arrogant to understand who your clients truly are. But I'm going to buy this place, and I'm going to make sure no one else ever has to deal with what I've dealt with here tonight. People like you," Michael paused, letting the words sink in, "people who think they can control others based on appearance and status, people like you are the reason we're in this mess to begin with. You can either learn from this, or you can watch as it all crumbles." The owner's face flushed with embarrassment. His pride, once a shield, now seemed like a foolish facade. He opened his mouth to argue but then paused, defeated. He knew it was over. Michael had made it clear. The shift in the room was palpable. The diners, who had been nervously whispering among themselves, now watched with rapt attention, as if they were witnessing history. The maitre d', still standing by the door, dared not move a muscle. Michael had turned the tables, and it was no longer just about an apology. It was about taking control and showing the world that power wasn't always what it seemed. It wasn't about who wore the most expensive suit or drove the fanciest car. It was about who held the reins, who had the right to make the decisions. And right now, Michael held those reins firmly in his hands. The owner, at a loss for words, finally sighed, the fight gone out of him. "All right," he said softly, his voice barely audible. "I'll sell." Michael nodded once, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corner of his lips. He had done it. Without a single outburst, without a single raised voice, he had turned the entire situation in his favor. As the owner sat back in his chair, defeated, Michael turned to the staff who were still standing there, watching him with a mix of awe and fear. "Start making the necessary calls," he ordered, his tone businesslike. "I want everything finalized within the hour. This restaurant will no longer be run by people who don't know how to treat their clients with respect." The staff moved quickly, their once confident demeanor now replaced by nervous compliance. Michael had already taken charge, and there was no turning back now. The owner, looking like a man who had just been freed from a terrible burden, signed the papers. The deal was done. In a matter of minutes, Michael Thompson had taken control of a luxury restaurant, with nothing more than his presence and his unyielding will. And as he stood there, surrounded by the remnants of the old regime, he knew this was just the beginning. He had already shown them all who held the real power. As Michael walked out of the back office, the weight of the moment still hung in the air, but he could feel the shift. He had taken control, and now the staff, though still uncertain, understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The general manager, his hands trembling slightly, came up to Michael, trying to regain a semblance of professionalism. "Mr. Thompson, I assure you we'll do everything we can to make this right, he said, his voice thick with nervousness. Michael didn't respond immediately. He simply walked past the manager, his stride steady and purposeful, not bothering to acknowledge the man's words. The restaurant staff, who had been standing awkwardly at the edges of the room, now began to whisper among themselves, their eyes on Michael as he moved through the dining area. It was as if the entire room had shifted to focus solely on him. He didn't mind. This was his moment, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. The diners, who had once been absorbed in their conversations, now looked up, their eyes darting between Michael and the staff. Some were still trying to piece together what had just happened. Michael was no longer just the man they had seen walk in unnoticed. He was now the man in control. The maitre d', who had once looked down on him, now stood off to the side, avoiding his gaze. Michael could feel the eyes of the restaurant on him, but he remained unmoved. He didn't need their approval. He had already shown them who he was. As Michael made his way toward the exit, he passed the hostess stand. The young woman who had insulted him earlier was still standing there, but now she looked completely different. Her once confident posture had been replaced by a stiff, awkward stance. Michael didn't look at her, but he could feel the shift in the air. She had underestimated him, and now she would never forget it. Outside, the city air felt cooler, the bustling sounds of traffic filling the silence that had followed him out of the restaurant. Michael stood for a moment looking up at the sky. The deal was done. The restaurant was his. But this wasn't just about the business. It was about something much bigger. It was about sending a message, not just to the restaurant owner, but to everyone who had ever underestimated him. He wasn't the man they thought he was. He was the man who would take control when it mattered. He was the man who would turn every insult into an opportunity. As he slid into the backseat of the car waiting for him, his phone buzzed. It was Carla. It's all set. The paperwork is being finalized, and the restaurant's assets are being transferred, she said, her voice crisp and efficient. Michael smiled. Good. Make sure we get the press release ready. Let them know exactly who's in charge now. Absolutely, Mr. Thompson, Carla replied. Michael leaned back in his seat, the weight of the moment finally starting to sink in. This was only the beginning. He had proven to himself, and to the world, that no one could take what he had worked for. The path ahead was wide open, and Michael Thompson was ready to walk it. As the car pulled away, the city lights flickered in the distance, but Michael's mind was already focused on the future. He had made his mark, and now nothing could stop him. As Michael sat in the backseat of his car, the streets of the city passing by in a blur, his mind raced with the possibilities ahead. The deal had been finalized. The restaurant was now officially his. But it wasn't just about the restaurant, it was about something much deeper, something far more significant. He had taken control in a way that no one expected. And now it was time to see the ripple effect. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from his lawyer. Everything is in motion. Press release is ready to go. Expect calls from the media soon. Michael didn't respond immediately. He already knew the impact this would have. The media would be all over this. The press would want to know how he, a black CEO, had walked into a luxury restaurant and taken control in less than an hour. How he had turned what should have been a humiliating experience into his victory. But it wasn't just about the press. It was about showing people, especially those who looked like him, that power could be taken, not just given. Michael had seen firsthand what it felt like to be overlooked, to be dismissed based on appearances. He had spent years proving himself in an industry that wasn't kind to people who looked like him. And now he was rewriting the narrative. The car pulled up to the sleek, modern building that housed his office. He stepped out, straightening his jacket, the weight of his success settling in. He wasn't just another CEO. He was a force to be reckoned with. Inside, his team was already waiting for him. Carla, his assistant, met him at the door with a smile that conveyed both relief and admiration. Everything's moving smoothly, she said, handing him a tablet with the day's reports. Michael glanced at the screen, his eyes scanning the numbers, the data, the new restaurant's figures. The acquisition had already begun to show signs of profitability. But beyond that, there was a deeper satisfaction. This wasn't just a financial victory, it was a symbolic one. As Michael made his way to his office, he could feel the weight of his decisions. This was the start of something bigger. The restaurant would be the first of many changes. He would continue to build his empire, one that didn't just rely on financial success, but on reshaping the narrative around Black executives. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and people who would try to undermine him. But he had already proven that he could handle it. The hardest part was over. The next chapter had already begun. As he sat at his desk, Carla handed him another file, one containing a list of potential new acquisitions. Michael took a deep breath, scanning the names on the list. There were several high-profile properties, restaurants, and businesses that were ripe for the taking. He could feel the fire inside him reigniting. This was his moment. This was his time. The phone buzzed again, but this time it was a call. "Mr. Thompson," the voice on the other end began, "we've just received confirmation from several media outlets. They want to run the story." Michael smiled, leaning back in his chair. "Let them," he said, his voice calm yet full of authority. "Let them tell the world what I've done. Let them tell the world what we're going to do next." The reporter on the other end hesitated for a moment, then continued. "We'll need a statement. Something that sums up what you've accomplished." Michael thought for a moment, then spoke, his words deliberate and powerful. "I didn't just buy a restaurant today. I bought a seat at the table for people who've been ignored, underestimated, and overlooked. This is just the beginning. The world is changing, and I'm going to be part of that change." He ended the call, feeling a surge of satisfaction. He knew this would resonate. The press would carry his words, but more importantly, people would hear them. They would see that someone who looked like them had made it to the top, not by playing by the rules but by rewriting them. As the day wore on, Michael felt the weight of his success. It wasn't just about the deal he had struck or the money he had made. It was about the message he had sent to the world, to his competitors, to anyone who had ever doubted him. The world was watching, and Michael Thompson was ready to show them exactly who he was. He was a man who had taken control. And this was just the beginning. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Michael. The acquisition was finalized, the media buzz grew louder, and the restaurant was now firmly under his control. What had started as a quiet victory in a luxury restaurant had turned into a full-scale transformation. Every day there was a new challenge, a new opportunity to reshape the restaurant into something far more than it had been. Michael wasn't just focused on the financials, he was focused on the culture, the service, and how the restaurant would reflect his vision. He had hired a new team, handpicked for their skills and their willingness to embrace change. Carla was still by his side, helping manage the day-to-day operations, and together, they had already begun to implement the changes that would elevate the restaurant from just another upscale dining experience to something revolutionary. As the media storm continued, Michael made sure to keep a low profile, but his presence was undeniable. He didn't need to be in the spotlight to show the world his power. His actions spoke louder than any headline ever could. One evening, after a long day of meetings and decisions, Michael sat alone in the restaurant's newly revamped private dining room. The ambience was now sleek and modern, with touches of elegance that reflected his own sense of style. He could hear the soft clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversations in the main dining area. It was a far cry from the tense atmosphere that had plagued the place just a few weeks ago. The restaurant was thriving. The employees were motivated, the clientele was impressed, and the press was still buzzing with the story of how the CEO had taken control in a single night. But Michael wasn't content to rest on his laurels. He knew that this was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. The world was watching, and he was determined to prove that this success wasn't just a fluke. He wanted to build something that would outlast the headlines, something that would be a testament to his vision and resilience. As he sipped his coffee, Michael thought about the people who had tried to stand in his way. They had underestimated him, written him off, and assumed that his success had come easy. But it hadn't. Every inch of his success had been earned. Every step he had taken had been met with resistance, but he had always pushed through. And now he was in a position to change the narrative, to rewrite the rules. The phone buzzed, snapping Michael out of his thoughts. It was a message from Carla. "The press is calling again. They want an exclusive interview." Michael smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of control. He knew the media would continue to chase him, to try and get the next big story. But he wasn't about to give them everything they wanted. "Tell them I'll be ready in an hour," he typed back, his fingers moving quickly. As the message sent, Michael felt a surge of confidence. He wasn't just a man who owned a restaurant. He was a man who had proven that no one could hold him back. As he stood up and walked toward the exit, he knew that this moment would mark the beginning of something much bigger. The world had seen a glimpse of what he was capable of, but Michael Thompson was just getting started. Michael sat in the quiet of his office, the press interview just behind him, his thoughts sharper than ever. The cameras had rolled, the questions had been asked, and the story was out. But there was something deeper he was thinking about: the future. He had proven his point, yes. He had shown that a single moment could shift the entire power dynamic. But now it was time to expand, to build something that would last. The restaurant was just the beginning. His phone buzzed again, another message from Carla. "The board is ready to discuss the next steps. They're eager to know your thoughts on expanding." Michael smiled to himself. Expansion had always been the goal, but now the world knew it was possible. The media attention, the public support, all of it was fuel for the next phase. But it wasn't about the headlines anymore. It was about building an empire that stood on its own, one that was based on respect, not appearances. He leaned back in his chair, thinking about the people who had doubted him. The ones who thought he would falter, the ones who thought they could keep him in his place. Every rejection, every slight had only pushed him forward. And now it was his turn to decide what came next. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a major investor. "Michael, this is it," the voice on the other end said, filled with excitement. "We've seen the impact you've made and we want in. We're ready to talk numbers." Michael's pulse quickened. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. He wasn't just building a restaurant or even a brand anymore. He was building a legacy. "Let's set up a meeting," Michael replied, his voice calm and steady, though inside he could feel the rush of adrenaline. This was how it was supposed to be. People who doubted him were now knocking on his door, ready to invest, ready to be part of his vision. As he ended the call, he stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline. This was his moment. It wasn't just about taking control of a single restaurant anymore. It was about taking control of an entire industry. And with every step he took, the world would see that Michael Thompson wasn't just another businessman. He was a force that would change the rules. And the best part? No one would see it coming. The press would keep chasing the story, but they'd never truly understand what he was building. He was too far ahead. The real work had only just begun. With a sense of finality, Michael picked up the phone again and called Carla. "Get the team ready. We're moving forward. It's time to take the next step." His voice was unwavering. Carla's response was swift, filled with the same determination he had in his own voice. "On it, Michael. We're ready." Michael smiled to himself. It was time. It was time to show the world exactly who he was. And this time no one would be able to stop him. As Michael sat in his office, the weight of his decisions began to settle in. He had built something from nothing, taking control of an entire restaurant, flipping the power dynamic in a matter of hours. Now the world was watching and he wasn't done yet. The investors had agreed, the plans for expansion were underway, and Michael knew that every step forward would be one that would redefine not just his legacy, but an entire industry. The media continued to chase the story, but he didn't need them. His actions had already spoken louder than any headline could. Yet there was more work to do. His phone buzzed once again, and this time it was an email from Carla. The subject line reading "Expansion Strategy. Next Steps." He opened it quickly, scanning through the details. The numbers were looking better than he had anticipated, and with the momentum building, it felt like everything was falling into place. But something was still missing. As Michael leaned back in his chair, he thought about the people who had shaped him, the mentors, the obstacles he had faced, and most importantly, the lessons learned. It wasn't enough to just achieve success. He needed to ensure that his success would create an impact. That impact would ripple out far beyond the walls of his businesses. It would shape the world for those who came after him. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an old friend, someone from his early days in the industry. "Heard about the restaurant. Impressive. Let's talk about collaborating." Michael's lips curled into a smile. Collaborations, partnerships. These were the keys to scaling his vision even further. He had no intention of doing it alone. It was time to build alliances, to turn the success of today into the foundation for tomorrow. He replied with a simple, "Let's set up a meeting." As he set the phone down, he looked out the window, his mind racing through all the possibilities. The restaurant was just the beginning. The partnerships, the new acquisitions, the empire he was building, they would all fall into place. But it wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, there always was. People who didn't like change, people who would try to tear him down. But Michael had learned long ago that it wasn't about avoiding the obstacles. It was about facing them head-on and using them as stepping stones to reach the next level. The world didn't always reward the quiet, the humble, the ones who waited their turn. No, it rewarded the bold, the ones who took what was rightfully theirs and used it to carve their path. Michael was done waiting. He had already made his mark. But this wasn't about proving anything to anyone else anymore. This was about proving to himself that he could continue to rise, that he could keep pushing the boundaries of what was possible. It was about leaving a legacy that would inspire others to do the same. The phone buzzed again, and this time it was Carla, letting him know that the press release would be sent out in the morning. "We're ready," she said. Michael smiled. He didn't need the press. He didn't need the world to tell him what he was capable of. He already knew. As the evening wore on, Michael felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had already achieved what many only dreamed of. And now, with everything falling into place, he was ready to take the next step. No one could stop him. He was building something much bigger than a restaurant, bigger than a business. He was building a movement. And it was only just beginning. The days following the announcement were nothing short of transformative. Michael had set a new precedent, and now the pressure was on. With every move he made, every deal he signed, the world was watching, waiting for him to slip up. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he moved with purpose, executing his plans with precision and calm. The restaurant was thriving, the staff was motivated, and his business was growing at an impressive rate. But Michael wasn't content to stop there. He had built something powerful, but now it was time to solidify his position in the industry. He had already proven himself once, but that was just the start. His eyes were set on the next big step, a challenge that would push him to new heights. The partnership he had discussed was now on the table, and the investors were eager to see what he could do with the resources they were offering. Michael knew that this was an opportunity to expand his influence, to create something bigger than a single restaurant or a single brand. He didn't need to rush. Everything he had worked for had led to this moment. But as the days passed, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play. There were whispers in the industry, rumors that others were waiting for him to fail, to stumble. But those whispers only fueled him. He had spent too long being underestimated to let anyone think he was weak. It was time to turn the tables once again. The phone buzzed again, a reminder that the world was still waiting for his next move. This time it was a call from Carla. "The investors are ready. They're waiting for you to come to the meeting," she said. Michael nodded, a sense of calm settling over him. "Tell them I'll be there soon," he said. He was ready. He had always been ready. Walking into the meeting, Michael could feel the eyes on him. The investors, the industry leaders, they were all looking for the next big thing. And Michael was ready to show them exactly what he was capable of. As the meeting progressed, Michael laid out his vision. Not just a restaurant empire, but a global movement that would reshape the way people thought about business, success, and power. The investors listened closely, hanging on every word. By the end of the meeting, Michael had secured the backing he needed. He had turned his vision into something tangible. He had taken another step toward building his legacy. But even as he left the meeting, Michael knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long, filled with challenges and obstacles, but it didn't matter. He had already faced the hardest part. The world had seen what he could do. And now nothing could stop him. As he walked out of the building, he felt a surge of pride. He had proven himself not just to the world but to himself. And now he was ready for whatever came next. The empire he was building wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Everyone who had been overlooked, underestimated. Michael Thompson had not only taken control